Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we're going to this Kiddushin daf Samaches. We're going to begin on Samaches Madav about 8 lines from the top of Acha. So we were learning in yesterday's daf that when it comes to a situation of Chayve Krisos, that the Kiddushin will not be Tofes, that such a marriage will not actually work. We ended up learning from a Hekesh. We said that just like your wife's sister, the Kiddushin is not typhus, as we learned through Psukim. So too, when it comes to any arayos, also the Kiddushin is not going to be typhus. Now, even though it's true, we could possibly learn out from the dinim of Nida. Now, even though Nida is a chayvi krisos, however, if you would marry a woman, mekadosh woman b'shas Nida, so the din is it's still a good Kiddushin, and in fact, if a person would have tashmish with a nida, even though it's a chiv karis, the child will not be a mamzer. But nonetheless, when it comes to possibly making a hekesh l'kula or l'chumra, and you can't choose one or the other, so we end up they're equal, so you end up going l'chumra. He says you can actually go down from a kavachaymer from a yavama. So, in other words, we're going to be able to learn out all other arayos. Ma yavama. When it comes to a woman who's a yavama, so her husband died childless, and now she's zokuk, shehi balav. So in that situation, that is considered to be a lav. In other words, you're not allowed to have tashmish anyone outside of that relationship. Nonetheless, even though it's only a lav, we'll toss about Kiddushin. Says Rashi, "Menayin shein Kiddushin Tyson v'yavama d'chsev lo tia eishes ames hachutza lo tebo havai lazar." In other words, once she's zokuk to marry this brother, so even though it's only a lav for her tashmish with another guy, so the din is still the Kiddushin would not be tyvus because she's zokuk to the brother. So chavi misas, chavi krisis, or kol shekain. Certainly, we should say that when it comes to chayvi krisos, which is what we're talking about, also chayvi misos, we can compare that to, that in that situation, certainly the Kiddushin is not going to be typhus. So Yehachim, if that's the case, then shar chayvi lavin nami. So why don't we say the same thing? Just like when it comes to Yavama, the din is, and you can learn out from Binyan Avrash, says, Ma'amat sina b'Yavama, shehi bolav in Kiddushin Tyson, ba'av kol shehu bolav in Kiddushin Tyson ba. We're only learning out that a chayvi kares is not, the Kiddushin is not typhus. Why don't you learn out when it comes to any chiv lav, based on, not from, we can just learn out straight from a binyan av, from a mamatzinu. What we find from here should also apply there. So again, it says beferish in the pasuk that the Kiddushin is typhus, because it says a person has two wives, one he loves and one that he hates. So why is the pasuk telling you that you hate your wife? I think Hashem hates certain people and loves certain people. It doesn't mean that the person is hated, but the relationship is a hated relationship. That this is something that the Torah does not like. Nonetheless, it says kisiana. It says that when you marry her, which means that it's a hated marriage, but the key word is it's a marriage. So the Kiddushin is still typhus. So even though maybe you're right, you would maybe think you learn from a mamasin from Yavama, but the truth is we find over here the pasuk Krisina l'shtei nashim that's talking about a situation that the Kiddushin is typhus even when it comes to chayv lavin. Rabbi Kiva ain't Kiddushin typhus b'chayv lavin. So kisien b'may mokim. So the pasuk does talk about a hated marriage, but according to the shita of Rabbi Kiva, he holds that chayvi lavin Kiddushin is not typhus. So what does he do with that pasuk? So he'll say moikim b'almano kohen gadol. The Karam Simoy that this pasuk is referring to a situation of an almana who marries a kohen gadol, which is also a lav. Rabbi Kiva always says it's a mamzer because Kiddushin is not typhus. Chutz ma'almano kohen gadol. When it comes to that, he makes an exception. Shahari Amr Tyre, the Har says, and then when it comes to this relationship don't marry each other because you're going to, and don't have be with one another because you're going to end up having a child, and that child's going to be chol, which is much chilul and isa. All they do is make chilul. In isa mamzerus, they don't become a mamzer. So therefore, we see from here clearly the din is that the Kiddushin is taifus, even according to Rabbi Kiva, who holds that Kiddushin is not taifus b'chavi lav, and he makes an exception when it comes to Amana Kohen Gadol because of the pasuk. Let's look at this quick Rashi while we're in the middle over here. When it says Senuim Seha Shinisuasan is Senuim Lemir Makoim. Something which Hashem hates, could go in Chavi Lavin. The Kamarachman Lucian, Alman Iswahu Havoya, it's a marriage. A common parach, Dilma B'Chavi Asehu, the Kaimer Avoy B'Chavi Lavin. The question again, how do we know that this hated marriage, I should say, is talking about because it's a Chavi Lavin? Maybe it's a Chavi Aseh. So the Gemara is going to discuss that. So in fact, the Gemara, Rabbi Yishav, the Yemer boy, and the Savach Kiva ben Yosef, we should go and scream and cry about Rabbi Kiva because he's so strict. So he says anyone who has bia which is not properly, the child will be a mamzer. So Hanicha Rabbi Yishav, I can understand the sheet of Rabbi Yishav that we just quoted. If all he's going to do is exclude the sheet of Rav Simoy. Rav Simoy, again, says that there's, when it comes to Amana Kohen Gadol, that's the one time in which Chavi Lavin, the din is that the Kiddushin will be typhus. So on this, Rabbi Shaviv says, oh, it's such a problem, right, that Rabbi Akiva caused problems for even this case, or also in this case, which means only when it comes to all Chavi Lavin, including Almana to Kohen Gadol. So therefore, in that situation, maybe there's other situations where it's a hated marriage, like a Chavi Aseh, for example, but it's still a marriage, so we can understand that pasuk. If we're going to tell me that maybe it's talking about a situation where it's Chavi Aseh, so then in that situation, all Chavi Lavin, including maybe even Chavi Aseh, so then when do we find this pasuk that we're talking about a situation that it's still going to be a good Kiddushin? Where it says, B'bu'ula l'kohen gadol. When it comes to a Kohen Gadol who's supposed to marry a Basula, supposed to marry a woman who is a virgin, but if he marries a Ba'ula, that's a Chavi Aseh. Because the pasuk says, it says that Basuleha yikach ishi. He's supposed to take a Basul. The pasuk's a Chavi Aseh, which means that if he doesn't take it, so he's not allowed to marry a Ba'ula, but it's not a lav, it's an Aseh, which is not as strong. So in that situation, even if he holds typically a Chavi Aseh, Kiddushin is not taifus, he makes an exception here. The question is why? Because this is not an Aseh that applies to all people. So therefore, he makes an exception in that case. Fine. Rashi, you can't ask Hazainihi Almana Garusha the Ba'ula Panuya Lav Zainihi. A Ba'ula Panuya is not considered to be in the category of a Zaina. Okay. Why do they say that this pasuk of Kisiena Le'ish Shtei Nashim, you have two wives, it's B'Chavi Lavin, Noigim B'Chavi Aseh? Maybe the pasuk is talking about Chavi Aseh. That only when it comes to Chavi Aseh, the Kiddushin is typhus. Mashma, when it comes to Lavin, it's not typhus, it will be Akasha. So Hani Chavi Aseh b'may ninhu. So 1 second. If you want to tell me the Kiddushin is typhus when it comes to Chavi Aseh, what is it though? Ish Dein Mitzris. Let's say we're talking about both parties, both are mitzrius. So in that case, shnehen senuas. Then they're both a hated relationship. I achas mitzrius v'achas Yisraelis. If one is mitzrius and one is Yisraelis, so that's what it's talking about. So shtei nashim al me'achad be'inon. It has to be that they come from the same nation. Otherwise, it's hard to understand how the pasuk is comparing one is hate, one is love. There must be some connection, comparison to the two in some regard. I ba'ula l'kohen gadol. As we said, so miksiv tienel koyin. It doesn't say in the pasuk. It says kisienel ish, which is mashma, just any person, even a non-Yisrael, a non-koyin. So since it says ish, it's also referring to a situation of a non-koyin. Therefore, he established that it's called a Chavi Lavin. Okay. Rabbi Kiva. So Rabbi Kiva, according to him, he really is kind of forced to have no choice but to be able to say. This is Rashi. Kivan de Galil Chakra. B'Yavama, since the pasuk says explicitly by Yavama the Lo Tasba Kiddushin that it's not typhus if an outsider, a chutzala, would be Makadisher, it doesn't work. Neilf minei the Chavi Lavin leis behu Kiddushin. He actually learns out from there that when it comes to all Chavi Lavin, it's not a Kiddushin. V'chisiena karcha Chavi Asei Kaimer. Therefore, he holds his Chavi Asei. Going to Chad Mitzvahs, one's a Mitzvahs. Question 7. Elu gimel biyos asiros in behen havlad mamzul kuliyam. It's going to Rabbi Kiva. So he said nid and saita, which was on the top of the elm, which we saw at the end of yesterday's daf, and beula l'koyin gadol because it's not shovel l'koil. Okay. Question 8. Minolin, how do we know the Kiddushin Tyson b'chavi lavin? So we learn it out because the pasuk says ki siana leish shtei nashim. A person has 2 wives, ha'achas ahuva v'achas senua, one in whom he loves and one which he hates, but it can't be referring to that, or Hashem hates. So it must be referring to that senua b'nesua seha, that it's hated by the Torah. Hashem despises such a relationship, and nonetheless, the pasuk says that kisiana, that it's actually a good marriage, and therefore because of that, that's how we learn that Kiddushin is typhus for Chavi Lavin. Okay, again according to the Rabbanan. All right, very good. Let's see if there's a question here. Didn't do TA yet. TB 6, same question. Elu gimel biyas asiris ein behen havlad mamzer kuliyalma, which is the same question as question 7. So this is TB 6. Okay. Weiter. So we're up to the 2 dots. So the Mishnah said on Samich Vav Beis, it says that if we're dealing with a situation where it's not a Kiddushin, not for you and not for anyone else, so in that situation we go after the mother. For example, the child of a Shivcha or a Nachris, of a non-Jew, and so that would also can include a Jewish man having relations with a non-Jew, so then the din is the child goes after the mother. Okay. Weiter. So Shivcha Kanainis Manolan, how do we know when it comes to Shivcha Kanainis? How do we know that Kiddushin is not Tofes? How do we know? So I'm Rav Huna, I'm recording the pasuk Shivcha Poim HaChamor, Am Daim HaChamor. When it came to the Kiddush Yitzchak, so Avram said to Yishmael and to Eliezer, so that you should stay with the donkey. And therefore, it shows that an Am, it's a play in words, that Am is, the nation is like a donkey. So he's basically saying, you're like a donkey, right? And this is because you don't see the Akkad, you don't see what's in front of you. So in that case, stay with the donkey. So it's not, obviously you cannot be Mekadesh a Chamor, so to a Shivcha. Ashkan Doli Tasma Kiddushin. So clearly, the Kiddushin is not typhus. As we continue to Samach Chesed Beis, Velada Kamosah Minolan. How do we know that the child will go after her? The Shivcha. Do you ever recall the pasuk says, the woman and her child will be to the master. Says Rashi, and this is B'Shivcha Kanainis. This is referring to a non-Jewish maid servant. Sheyachta le'eved ivri. She was designated to a Jewish slave. V'yamar the yetze haben chafshim aviv. That the child will not go free with the father, but rather the child will go after the mother. So therefore, that teaches us that the child is connected to the mother, and therefore the status of this child will be just like the mother's Shivcha. Nachris Menon. How do we know when it comes to a non-Jew that you cannot marry a non-Jew? So Amar Kra, Lotischasin Bam. It's very clear. You cannot do chasnus. There's no marriage. It doesn't work. As I said before, there's no intermarriage. It doesn't exist. According to halacha, there is no such thing as a marriage. So Ashchan and the Kedushi, how do we know that the child goes after the non-Jewish woman? Rav Yochanan, he says, Mishim Rav Shimon ben Yoichai, his name. Do you ever recall the pasuk says, Ki yaser es bincha, that he will turn your son away. Mi'achrei bincha, so mi'achrei bincha, habam Yisraelis kroi bincha. So what do we say? Mi'achrei. So bincha habam Yisraelis, we see that your son, bincha habam Yisraelis, who there was tashmish with a Jewish woman, kroi bincha. That's called your son. So you can make a diak that it's only bincha in the event where the mother is Jewish. However, if your child came from an Ovedes Kachavim, that child is no longer called your son, El Binah. Rather, that child is not called your son, but rather it's called her son. That's what it means. Fine. Okay. Let's look in Rashi. Well, Kiyaser bincha. Well, El Minek said before that says bincha lo sitin livnoi. Your daughter you should not give to their sons. Bincha lo tikach levincha. You shouldn't give your daughter to their sons. The samachle. Then next it says Kiyaser bincha, that when your son will be turned away. But the loksiv Kiyaser es bidcha doesn't say your daughter; it says your son. Mashma de ben hanayil l'avchachavim mebidcha kaimer. It's referring to the situation where this child was born from avikachavim from your daughter. She yisrenu ha'avikachavim mi'acharav v'shamina de ben bincha, that your daughter's son, even if she had relations and this boy is a product of a non-Jewish man, nonetheless, Kori Bincha is still called your son because the girl is Jewish. However, the other way around, no. Okay, so this is basically saying, don't be with an Akum man because he will turn your son, who is Jewish, because his mother is Jewish. Only here, but not the other way around. Okay. No, we can learn from here that Ben Bitcha, your daughter's son, Habom Chachavim, was tashmish with a Ovid Chachavim. Kori Bincha is your son. But name except Ravino Ovid Chachavim of Ebed Habal Bas Yisrael Vad Mamzer. Why don't we say that the child's Taka Mamzer? Nehi the Kashul Havi. I understand he's not kosher. Mamzer will have a posel mikri. He's going to call him a posel. Says Rashi, Kishar no yuladim avera. So obviously, the fact that this Jewish girl had tashmish with a non-Jewish man, even though it's true this child's Jewish, the child will be apostle. It says Rashi, like any other avera, b'chavi lavin oasei she'enim mamzerim. This is no different than a chavi lavin, chavi asei, in which we say that obviously it's not a good thing, but the child will be considered to be apostle, but nonetheless is not going to be a mamzer. So Gemara says, well, hahu b'sheben goyim ksiv. These psukim are specifically referring to the Shiva Goyim in Eretz Yisrael. The question is, Sharm Umos Manolin, how do we know that this din also applies to other nations? So Amr Krak, Yasers Bincha, Rabos Kol Hamasirim. So it's coming to include any time that the child is being given over. Doesn't matter if it's Zainu Moist or any situation. The din is the same. So Anichlo Rav Shimon Dersh Time to Kra. That's good if you hold like Rav Shimon, who typically darshans the reasons of a pasuk. For example, Rashi brings down the Gemara in Bama Matzia toward the end of that Masechta. Gabi Almana de Kaimer Ashiru Mashkinaisa Anielo Mashkinaisa. So when it comes to someone who is rich, you can take collateral from her. But someone who is poor and borrowed money from you, you should not take collateral from the poor. The time of my so the reason why you shouldn't take it is because you're going to have to give it back at night. Because they have nothing else. They're poor. Since you have to constantly go back and forth every single day to keep retrieving it and taking it back, this collateral, shachris l'mashkin v'arvis l'hachzer, in the morning to take it and then at night to give it back so they won't freeze, because you're taking like their one blanket. So ata mashia shemra bishchanaseha. The fact that you keep going into this woman's house, who is an almana, so you should not do so, because it makes it look bad. People are going to start spreading rumors of what you're really doing over there. You may be engaged in some it looks like you're engaged in improper behaviors. So therefore, it says by an almana, but he says it must be this din applies only to a poor woman. But if she's rich, Rav Shimon says it's not a problem because you could take her mashka and you're not going to have to give it back because she has 50 blankets in her house. So if she gave you one blanket, you don't have to return it to her. And therefore, this is what he does. He's darshan's time to kra. The pasuk is implying that it's only someone who's poor that this din should apply. So v'hakinami darsh taima dechitun mishum kiyasir. He'll say, why should you not intermarry? Why should you not have a relationship, a Jewish woman with a non-Jewish man? Because that non-Jewish, this idol worshiper, is going to influence your child, will end up also being engaged in idol worship. So what difference does it make, whether it's from Zayin Umos or any nation? There's still going to be an influence on this child. And therefore, that's why Rav Shimon, it's good according to Rav Shimon, because he understands the logic. He says the logic shouldn't make any difference if it's Zayin Umos or not. However, according to the Rabbanon, that situation, maybe not, says Rashi. Umos shebachutz la'aretz, when it comes to the nations outside of Israel, they don't worship idols. Even if they do worship idols, they don't do it because they actually believe in what they're doing. They're just living their lives. And therefore, they're not really going to be a horrible influence causing this child to be engaged in idol worship. So maybe it's not an issue when it comes to them. So that's the reason why we're asking the question, how do we know that it also applies to them? That the child will go after the mother, fine. Or also with the chasim bum as well. So the Gemara says like this. It says that afterwards you can go and have tashmish, which is mashma, not from before. Says Rashi, this is referring to the situation of Yafas Tayar. Now you're allowed to be with her. Now, which is mashma, before you were not allowed to be with her. There was no heter before, and therefore that shows you clearly that, and that's talking about also shar umois, that you're going to fight them, because it says on the side, because the ilu b'shiva umos ksivu sachaya kol neshama. So clearly, it's referring to shar umos. So therefore, that's the answer. So mechlal demikar lo yitafsu b'kedushin. Ashkel no yitafsu b'kedushin. V'ladikam ma'isam anolan. How do we know again? According to the Rabbanon, they will also say the child goes after the mother. So mekra kisienel ish v'yalduloi, that you have when a person marries and they have a child. Kol heicha de krinin be kisiena krinin be v'yaldulo. Anytime it says it's a marriage, we say that it was born to him, lo. However, if there's not a Kiddushin, whenever you find a Kiddushin, it's not typhus, so then we don't say when there's a child that it's born to him, but it's going to be born to her, because we go after her. So if that's the case, you should be able to learn it out from the same pasuk from a shivcha. So why'd you have to learn out from Daim l'chamor, and then we on the morning v'isha v'yodeha t'enodeha. So nechanami. So el ha'isha v'yodeha t'enodeha l'mai l'muli. Why do we need that pasuk? We can learn it all out from the same thing, as we just said from Ish Shvas Tayar, and also this drasha of that when it's a Kiddushin's typhus, and you have a child, it's lo, it's your child, it's his child. Mashma, if Kiddushin's not typhus, then it's her child. So you can learn that from a shivcha too. So what do we do with the pasuk? So we can use it. Look at the Sanya. As we continue to Samach Tasamad Aleph. The person says to his maidservant, who happens to be Mubaris, pregnant, Hariyat Bas Chayrin, you are free with this document, this get shichur, and also, however, Vladech Eved. However, your child inside of you, in utero, I want to keep that child as my slave. So the din is Havlad Kamosa, Div Rabbi Yossi Glili. Rabbi Yossi says, no. Once you freed her, the child within her is also free. It's a package deal. Chacham Amrim, Devar Kayamin. he actually has the ability to make such a statement, to split them, if you will. That belongs to the master. So my Talmuda. So what do you mean? That pasuk sounds like they're connected. So and then he ended up using this pasuk to say they're not connected to the Chachamim. So I'm a Rabbi, no, out of Rabbi Yosef Glili. What this pasuk is in support of Rabbi Yosef Glili. Rabbi Yosef Glili says that it's a package deal. So if you would say to the mother, you're free, but I would like to keep your fetus as a slave, that doesn't work, because the pasuk says that once you freed her to Isha v'yoladeha, the woman is going to be linked to the child. Okay, we're going to stop there. Okay, there's no questions there. A second. Okay, I don't know why I have this test here anymore. This is 197. This was 198. Okay. TA5. Maha Mokro Maskana de Vlad Shivcha Vlad Nachris Kamoisa. How do we know this? Maskana. So maybe not according to Rav Shimon. So it says Ki Siena V'yalda Kol Hechad Lo Krinan Ki Siena Lo Krinan V'yaldu Loy. So that's what we end up saying. Is how we learn out Shivcha as well. So we talk to learn out Shivcha and Echinami, we learn that out as well. TA5. That the din is the same from the pasuk Kisienu Ish V'yaldu Lo. Kol Heichad Krinan Bei Kisienu Karinan Bei V'yaldu Loy. However, if not, then we do not read V'yaldu Lo. Okay, TB 7. See that in tomorrow's daf. Adkan.